A while ago, I picked up the Kill Team Starter Set, which is basically the Octarius box set light. It pretty much comes with everything that the Octarius box set comes with, but most of the big terrain pieces are missing, which is fine. You still get 2 full kill teams with great miniatures and a whole bunch of small scatter terrain. In addition to that, you get a miniature version of the core rulebook, and you get this Recruit Edition book, which comes with some small scenarios to help you learn how to play the game, as well as all the stats that you need for the miniatures included in the set. Unfortunately, what this book does not come with are the rules to actually run these 2 kill teams outside of those small beginner missions. So if you want to bring these to a tournament or go play at a friend's house, other than sort of limited beginner missions, you're kind of out of luck. Now, of course, the only book that those rules do come in is the Octarius mission rulebook. So I went on eBay and I found a copy of that for about $15. Not a bad deal. However, this book comes with a whole bunch of scenarios that you can play that include the big terrain pieces that this box doesn't come with. So the only thing to do is to make it from scratch myself.
So the first thing I needed was to get the dimensions of the terrain I was going to recreate. I found a list of the pieces and their dimensions on Reddit, which listed approximate dimensions for all of them. According to that post, all the platform heights were about 3 inches high. The main walls were 7 inches by 3.5 inches and 8 inches by 2.5 inches. The oil rig was 2 inches by 2.5 inches, with the storage tanks adding another inch, and the small platforms were 1.5 by 2 inches. I started with some foam core for the main wall sections. I decided to average out the widths in order to keep the construction a little simpler. So instead of making 2 of the wall sections 2.5 inches and the other 2 3.5 inches wide, I just made them all 3 inches wide. I cut 4 pieces of foam core into 3 inch by 3 inch pieces, 2 more into 3 by 8 inch pieces, and the last 2 into 3 by 7 inch pieces. I marked the sides I wanted on the inside with an X in order to keep track of where I was supposed to make my cuts. Next, I decided to bevel the edges in order to get a nice clean fit on the corners. I cut the first one just by eye, but realized they probably won't fit exactly. So for the next piece, I tried using my speed square to angle the knife at 45 degrees, but it was tricky keeping it from wobbling around. And I ended up getting quite a bit of tear out in the foam, which made the pieces not fit properly. Finally, I decided to try using a speed square as a marking gauge, so I set the end of the ruler to be the same width as the foam, and then slid it along the paper where I was going to make a cut. The corner of the ruler kind of bit into the paper a little, making it easy to see where to cut. So the rest was really easy after that. Next, I used a speed square to make sure that my walls were at a nice 90-degree angle. And used hot glue to put them together. For the outside of the walls, I wanted them to look like they were thrown together using old sheet metal and the parts from old broken buildings and vehicles. So I'm cutting a bunch of angular shapes from cereal boxes. I also cut some out of corrugated paper to look like metal roofing. I got this piece from a pizza box, but I think you can buy corrugated paper in packs from craft stores or online. Once I thought I had enough, I used an old dollar store brush to spread Mod Podge on the backs of these, and then glue them to the outside of the walls. I later decided to make some chipboard girders, and for 3 of the 4 walls I glued them on before this step, but it doesn't really make too much difference either way. I'm happy with the coverage here, so onto the girders. These girders are supposed to look like large supporting structures, so I cut 1/2-inch strips of chipboard to make these. In hindsight, I think I should have mixed it up and done a few 1/2-inch ones and mostly 3/8-inch wide girders, because these turned out to be a little bigger than I like for this scale. These are going to go all the way from the ground to above the tops of the 3-inch high walls, so I'm cutting them to be 4 inches long. The trickiest thing about making these was making sure the middle was at a 90-degree angle from the 2 outsides. I'm not sure how to make it easier, so I just took my time setting them in place. Definitely give the first piece time to dry before putting the second one on. That really helped me getting them nice and square. I decided I want a few of these to look like they were built into the wall a little more, so I measured a little less than halfway from the center, and about 3 1/16 inch from the bottom. Then I cut that part out of a few of these. That way I can glue the cutout part right to the wall and it'll be recessed a little farther than the uncut ones. That should also help break up the profile of the wall a little bit and introduce some variety. Okay, next we're going to work on the 2 small standalone platforms. So, now that I've made about 1,000,000 4-inch girders, it's time to make 1,000,000 3-inch ones. Next, I'm cutting a semi-random shape from a piece of chipboard to use as the main platform. I want both of these to be the same shape as each other, so I'm using the first one as a template to cut the second. These are each going to sit on top of 2 3-inch long girders. I wanted these to be the same shape as each other, but still be a little unique, so I'm cutting the middle out of one, and then using some small pieces of popsicle sticks and white glue to connect it back together. Then for the other one, I'm going to cover it in this plastic grating that I picked up at Hobby Lobby. I'm just using a thick layer of Mod Podge to glue this stuff on, and it worked really well. I made a mistake here and flipped this piece upside down when I glued it together, so my two platforms are going to be mirror images of each other instead of the same shape. The reason I jumped over to making these before finishing the big walls was because all these pieces are supposed to fit together. This is a picture of the official terrain, and these are the two pieces I just made. If I don't have these done, I won't know what shape to make the floor/roof for the wall pieces. But with those out of the way, it's back to the walls. To start, I'm putting some cut up bits of popsicle stick together to make a wooden walkway. This is going to be supported by another 3-inch girder and the side of the wall. I'm using white glue to connect them to the chipboard, and then hot glue for the foam. Hot glue's a lot easier, but I didn't want the ugly strings and massive hot glue to show on the thin chipboard. Here I've got all the walls put together, and I'm adding the two finished sections in the middle so I can see how to shape the rest of the floor. This was when I realized I had flipped the second platform upside down, and they don't fit together, but I decided to just roll with it instead of fixing it. For the rest of the floor support, I'm adding a second girder and then connecting it to the structure with a couple more smaller girders. So here I'm measuring how long they need to be. After I make the small ones, I cut through the top of the wall to let the girder pass through and let it stick out of the front a little. Then I just hot glue everything together. I need the roof to fill this area, so I'm using some serial card to cut a template for the rest of the shape. This part is a little tricky since everything is lightweight and wants to move around. But once I have my shape right, I can put this on the cutting mat and make the rest of the roof on a more solid surface. First, I'm cutting a big piece of chipboard, using the template to get the angle right. And I decided to double the thickness of this piece, so I'm making a duplicate using the first one. Back to the chipboard, I'm cutting the small protruding bit off the side. Once I overlapped them, I realized that the double thick piece was either too high if it was on top, or it made the smaller piece sit at a funny angle if it was on the bottom, so I decided just to cut around it. Next I wanted a little more of the corrugated paper, but it's not strong enough to be a floor that can hold miniatures, so I glued it to a piece of chipboard first. I realized it was too wide, so I'm just cutting off a bit. And then just some hot glue to get everything in place. Another piece of chipboard for the back. And then one last one with some more grating on top to finish it up. Just checking to see if a guardsman can stand up despite some uneven flooring. And then checking to see if it can hold a mostly full bottle of Mod Podge. It's nice and strong. Okay, finally time to use those 4-inch girders I made at the beginning. You can see how the one with the sides cut out fits right up to the wall. Now I'm taking some of the cutoffs from the chipboard to make a sort of railing at the top. This large bent piece is serial cardboard. And I'm just sticking some more bits on to finish it up. And here we have the finished piece. Or nearly. I actually want to add some more details, so let's make some rivets. I'm using some chipboard and a 1mm hole punch to make some tiny rivets. I used Mod Podge and a pair of tweezers to place them on wherever I thought they'd look good. Next I'm gluing the rest of the 4-inch girders to the other walls. Make sure when you're gluing these on that you don't put them on upside down like I did. Thankfully I realized my mistake before this one dried. With all the walls put together, I need to finish making roof templates. And it's just more of the same as last time. adding girders, popsicle sticks, chipboard. I waited until after the roof was on to do all the railings, but I don't know whether that was any easier. It probably doesn't matter what order you do it in. The other two are the same methods as the first, so we'll skip ahead to the oil rig. First, I'm cutting another 3-inch girder, but this time I'm cutting 4 pieces instead of 3. Then I make marks every 1 centimeter along the length of one of them. And then I draw a line straight down the center and make marks where the 1 centimeter marks intersect. Then I tape the mark piece to one of the other pieces. Now I'm finding a drill bit that's the same diameter as a Q-tip with the cotton pulled off. I make indents in the line intersections using a hobby knife. These will keep my drill bit from slipping and getting off center. Then I drill through both pieces. And I use my knife to trim the excess that pokes out. After the second hole, I decided to put the Q-tip in to keep the 2 pieces from slipping out of alignment. The tape was holding them okay, but not perfectly. Next, I mark the Q-tip in 1/2-inch lengths and use my knife to cut it into sections. Now I've separated the 2 pieces with holes, and I'm gluing them to the 2 pieces without holes. Then I just glue the pieces of Q-tip into the holes in one. And then brush some glue on the opposite ends. Then I put the other end on, and if all the holes are lined up right, we should have a nice little ladder. Okay, now for the oil tanks. I'm using an empty bubble wand from the dollar store, since it's almost exactly 1 inch in diameter, and it was going in the trash anyway. I'm roughing up the smooth surface with some 600 grit sandpaper, just so that the paint and glue will adhere to it. If you have a razor saw, or any other small saw with a small serration, I'd recommend you use something like that to cut this. I couldn't find my hacksaw anywhere, so I just used a box knife to cut this. But it was hard work getting through it without crushing it and causing a crease that I wouldn't be able to get out. But I managed somehow. Next, I'm flattening the cut ends with some 60 grit sandpaper, and then cleaning it up with some 100 grit. Now to make the top of the flat one, I'm just using some cereal cardboard. Next, I'm making some bands to go around the containers with some more cereal card. I want wanted to make sure that the ends are nice and square so they line up well when I wrap it around. The glue didn't want to hold on, so I just used a bit of tape to clamp it while it dried. And there's the final product. Next is the pump, so I'm starting with some paper straws and a barbecue skewer. The smaller straw was the perfect size to fit inside the bigger one, so I layered them, and then the skewer fit inside of those. I cut a small piece of skewer and glued it horizontally on top. Then I wrapped it with a small piece of cardboard. I used hot glue to fill in any gaps and make it look like a solid piece. Next, I cut 2 more pieces of skewer and glued them side by side on top of that. Now for the counterweight thing. I'm starting with a random shape from chipboard. And then I duplicate it. Then I take a strip of chipboard and make sure it's exactly the same width all the way. I start cutting it into small sections and gluing it around the outside of the first piece. Once there's just a small hole left, I glue the second piece on the other side. Then I run 2 more lengths of chipboard from the hole and add small sections in a zigzag to keep them spaced apart. Once I reach the middle, I cut 2 small circles from serial card. And glued them on. Then I finished the zigzag. Then I cut 2 very thin circles from a paper straw and glued them onto the bigger circles. Next, we need a girder for the pump to sit on top of. I also cut a base for the pump out of chipboard. This is 2 little pieces glued together. Then we glue it all up. Next is the platform for the oil rig. This is where the ladder will lead to. Cut a semicircle into 1 piece of chipboard so that it can sit right against 1 oil tank. I'm cutting a small indent for the ladder to fit into. These are glued together, so let's see how it all looks together. I think the girder needs a little support, so I made another one the same width, and I cut it at a sharp angle, and then I just glue it to the side. One more piece, and I think this is finished. I actually decided to make another small girder and glue it on underneath, just for some more support. I forgot to film it though. Okay, now it's onto the bases. I cut them out of 1/8 inch hardboard that I got from Home Depot, and made them all about 1 inch bigger than the total footprint of each piece. So the 3 inch by 8 inch walls have bases that are 4 inches by 9 inches, etc. The small platforms are an exception since they have to fit inside the structure. I'm using construction adhesive to attach these to the bases, and it's quite thick, so I had to use the end of a paintbrush to smooth out the edges. I put a little bit of extra around the plastic on the oil rig. To prime them, I'm using a mix of black craft paint and Mod Podge. This should help strengthen the cardboard a little bit once it's dry and keep it from splitting. Here's the whole thing put together and primed, all ready for painting. I went ahead and painted the oil rig first off camera to get a feel for what I wanted. I think the overall tone was a little too drab, so I'm going to use some brighter colors for the rest. But overall, I'm happy with how this looks. So to start off, I'm using bright silver to paint all the corrugated steel. After those, I added some black to the silver to dull it down, and painted the girders and several of the other parts of the wall. Next, I'm hitting random flat bits with a nice bright yellow. This stuff took around 4 coats to cover the black primer. Then we'll cover most of the rest of the flat pieces with red. The wood I'm hitting with a burnt umber. In hindsight, this was probably too dark, but I didn't really care enough to change it. This one piece reminded me of the side of an Imperial Guard vehicle, so I decided to paint it green. This green took like 4 or 5 coats to completely cover. Here's everything with the final base coat done. I didn't bother putting too much time into the back, I just hit it with a mix of silver and black. Now we start weathering. First up is a dry brush of pure silver, and then I'm stippling that onto everything that's supposed to be metal. Next is a thinned down mixture of orange and brown for a rust effect. I'm paying attention to try and hit the areas where rust would build up the most, such as around the rivets and where the paint chipped off of the red and yellow sheet metal. Next, a dry brush of brown and white to help weather the boards. Finally, a black wash to cover everything. I'm just using black craft paint mixed with water for this. On the backs, I tried to paint streaks to make it look like the grime was running down the walls, but once it dried, you couldn't really see the streaks, so it might have been better just to cover the whole thing. With all the weathering done, it's time for some freehand details. I actually should have done these before the weathering. I'm painting some lettering onto the green piece to look like the C and A of Cadia. Next up is some orc faces. I'm using a Google image search for reference. Unfortunately, I accidentally did almost all the rest of the freehands with my pieces beside the camera instead of in front of it. So I'll show you whatever footage I actually got. Lastly, it's time for the bases. I'm spreading some white glue with a cheap brush all over them. Then I'm dumping sand on top and then just tip the excess back into the container. To seal in the sand, I filled just the bottom of this container with water, and then I'm mixing Mod Podge and brown paint in. The mixture should be about 1 part water to 2 parts Mod Podge and 2 parts paint. The paint I'm using is pretty thin already though, so if you have thicker paint, you might need more water. The goal is to make it thin enough to flow into the sand and saturate it, so that once it dries, it binds everything together. Finally, I'm mixing brown, yellow, and white for a dry brush of Encarnacion's favorite color.
Who is this Encarnacion?
Well, my favorite color is light tan.
And with that, we're finished.